Hi, my name is Derek Humphreys and I'm Developer Engagement Lead here at Mastercard. This video is the first in a series of videos where I'm going to walk through how to get access and integrate with our open banking APIs. So I'm going to start in this video by showing you how to just get up and running to get as far as pulling transactions from a bank account and do so through our Postman collection. So before we get started, there's a little bit of housekeeping. So everything's going to work through our developer at Mastercard website or platform. This is where you as a developer will actually set up your account, get access to your project, add your APIs. I'm going to walk through the whole process. So we need to do this before we execute or work against any of our APIs. So when you come here, you can actually sign up. Sign up is very simple. You just enter in your credentials. And then you enter in just like a password, sorry, an email address and a password that you select, and then just some basic account information. I already have an account, as you can see, it's already filled in. So I'm going to log in. And once then it shows me all my projects. And from there, you can go into your API grid and you can go in and select the API that we're interested in. And I've already done that. So here is the open banking API documentation page. And in here, there's a wealth of information in relation to an overview of the API, a fantastic getting started guide that walks you through step by step how to get connected. And I'm going to be doing some of that here now on this video, as well as a detailed reference for the API and every one of the endpoints. But before we get into that, just for those who may not be familiar with kind of the overall flow of open banking, I'm just going to give you a quick overview to help you visualize and put it in context of typically what's going on, what you're trying to build before I get into showing the plumbing. So typically you'd have your own application and you're at a point where you want to allow one of your customers to grant you access to their bank account. So maybe you want to pull just their opening balance or a balance to see how much funds they have. Or maybe you want to pull their past 6 months of transactions to be able to execute against something. Maybe you want to be able to help them pay utility bills, or maybe you're doing a budgeting app. Whatever it is, you want to get access to their bank account details. So the flow would be that you would authenticate against the API like you do against any other APIs. And then you get to a point where you want to allow that user, that customer, to securely authenticate against their bank so they can grant permission to give you access to their bank account. So to do that, and I'll show you in a moment, you will go to the Open Banking API and it will provide you with a dialog. And so at this point, you're no longer in your application, you're in the Open Banking flow. And in here, they'll select the bank that they're part of. Then at this point, they'll enter their bank credentials here. So these are actual banking credentials they use in their app or in their online typically. Then they'll see the list of accounts they have available to them. They'll select the one or more accounts they want to grant you access to, and then they'll submit. And what you will get back then is a token that you can then use to access their bank account on their behalf. So that gives you just a quick overview. When I'm talking about various different things, it gives you a way of visualizing what it is we're trying to do. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to refresh this page because actually I'm logged in. Yep. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a project. So typical of any of these developer platforms, we're going to go in here. It's already pre-selected the Open Banking API for us because that's what we've started from. I'm going to give it a project name, maybe Open Banking Test 2. Let's give me a company name, in this case, just nothing. Regions, United States. And then this is just for my own information, just a description. So if I've got multiple accounts set up, at least I know what I'm talking about here. So this is test video 2. Continue. So behind the scenes, this is actually setting up your developer account, and it's giving you your partner ID, your secret, your overall credentials that you're going to need. And now I'm into the dashboard, developer dashboard for my account. And here I can see I've immediately been given access to the sandbox. I have a partner ID. Don't worry about these. These will all be null and void. So no harm showing them in this case. And we're going to be using them as part of the demo later on. So it gives me a partner ID, which identifies you, which is how every call you make is going to include your partner ID. And then the secret and app key that you're going to use initially to authenticate against the API, which allows you then to use the API going forward. Here's a description I entered in, and at some point in the future, I may then want to move to production, but that's for another video in the future. So you'll make note of these credentials, which you can just copy out And you can also do other actions such as delete the credentials. So I'm going to copy these into another file so I can use them when I'm actually working through Postman. So let's see the API in action. And to do that, we want to go back to our documentation. And I'm going to go into the quick start guide because in here it shows you how to run the Postman collection. So you can run it directly here from pressing this button, but I'm also just going to show you that actually it's available on GitHub. And this is available here. So this is your Postman collection up here. So you can use it from inside the actual documentation. You can read all the documentation here, and you can also run it from here also. So we're going to run it inside. So it's going to fork the collection into my workspace in Postman. So there's a name I'm going to give it. That's my workspace, and I'm just going to fork it now. So this takes about 10-15 seconds. So I've just paused there, so I'll probably just shorten this so that and we'll come in. And here it is now. I'm back inside my Postman on my workspace. Now this is open in the browser, but I'm going to get out of here and actually work on the application itself for Postman. And there is the collection that has been just forked. So you can see other ones I've already set up previously. That's one where I actually just imported the Swagger definition straight in, so you can do that also. But with the collection, you get a lot other bells and whistles that are actually much more useful for you. So where we're going to start off is, along with this collection, is we got an environment called test drive. And test drive is where you're going to put your partner ID, secret, app key, and later on other variables that you want to use throughout your collection. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the credentials that I have here and I'm going to copy them in here. So as if by magic, I've copied in my details. Again, I don't mind these being visible because none of this will exist by the time this video goes out. So that's my partner ID that identifies me, my secret and application key that I will be able to use to authenticate in order to use the API for the first time. So I should save that. Oh, I moved the page. One thing to watch for, and it catches me out over and over again, is make sure that your environment is set to the correct one. Otherwise, you're going to be banging your head wondering why your API isn't authenticating correctly, going back and reevaluating your variables over and over again, only to find out you've got the wrong environment set. So once that's done, we'll be back here once or twice more to add in a couple of more variables, but right now we've enough to get started. Okay, so now that we have the variables set up, the first thing we would do in any of these collections or anytime you're talking to an API is to authenticate with the API. And what happens here is essentially you pass up your partner ID and secret, which will pull from your environment variables, and then it'll return back a token that you can use in all your subsequent calls. But the neat little thing here is if we look at the root of the collection and look at this script. So a lot of these APIs have post and pre and post scripts that they run. This actually ensures that before every single API call you make, it is going to go off and refresh and get you a token. So it's going to take your partner ID and secret, and it's going to then make a call to the API, the same one there, the authentication API, and it's going to take that token back and it's going to put it into a global variable called app token. And then that app token is going to be used in every single call thereafter. So we don't actually have to call authentication. It's going to call it first before every single call going forward, which makes it pretty neat. So our first step then becomes, instead of authenticating, it's going to be essentially creating a test customer. Now, you will have a customer in your application, but you're going to want some way of linking that to the customer that is created in our open banking API, because we're going to have to link that to the credentials that are then used to access their bank account. So this is the first step here. We're going to add a testing customer because we are going to be, we're sort of like in a sandbox environment. So in here, you will enter a username, a first name and last name. The username has to be unique for your application. This piece of script actually just puts a timestamp on it to ensure that the username is unique every single time. Now, what it also does though, because this is typically used for testing purposes, is this collection, so it just runs through the collection from top to bottom. This postscript here actually cleans up after itself. So after it successfully created a customer, it then immediately goes in and deletes the customer. So we're going to stop that from happening this time because we want this customer to exist so that we can use this customer in all our subsequent calls. So I've commented out that piece of code, and obviously you're free to do whatever you want because you've split out and you're using your own version of the collection. And what I want to do is I want to capture the customer ID that comes back, and I want to store that. So we're going to take the response body. Let's make sure I spell all this correctly. Response body. And we're going to put it into the environment variable. Oop. Uh, which one did we create? There's one there that should be called customer ID. There we are, customer ID. And we're going to take the response.id, so the ID that gets returned by the response. So what happens there is when it comes back and successfully creates it, it's going to store that in there. So we'll have a quick look. We'll just check the environment variables again. Let's put them up there. As you can see them, customer ID is currently empty. But if we go back now to testing customer, and I'm going to call this, and we're going to hit send and bring the body up. So there we have it. We have a new ID and new username with a unique timestamp and a created date. So this ID, if I pop out now to test drive, is now available. So I can now use this in my subsequent calls. And so the next call we want to do is we have now got our customer set up. We now want to allow that customer to access their bank account and be able to give us back a token. And for that, if I close this down, we need to go to connect. And we want to generate a connect URL. So a lot of variables you can pass up here essentially, but it's going to pass up the partner ID and the customer ID that we've just created. So it can link whatever the customer agrees to back to this customer ID. So I'm now going to hit send. And what you get back then is a link to a dialog that you can now open, but this is now hosted on a different server. This is a Finicity Open Banking server under Mastercard. And so when we copy this into our browser, our session expired because they always expire on after a certain number of minutes. It now brings up, so this is a dialog that you would launch from your application, but it's now, the customer is now in a different flow. And so I can go looking for the FinBank, which is the test bank that we use for all of this. It then just explains to the customer what's going to happen next and how their credentials are going to be used. And now we're going to actually go and set up a user. Now you can put anything in here for the username, but there's a set number of profiles. I'll just pop out now to our quick start guide. And if I pop back here and look under, where is it, test the APIs, you will see a list of different profiles I can use that show you the different kinds of accounts that are going to be set up in the sandbox for these users. So I'm going to use profile 9 here. Oh, I was actually in there. I'm going to put in profile 9 and just make sure that's correct and hit submit. And that brings me into, so that's the credentials the customer would have used to access their bank account. And now they get a list of all their bank accounts. So let's just check a few of these. It doesn't have to be all of them. And hit save. And then that just confirms there's the FinBank that we have and hit submit. And then we come back into our Postman. So that URL would have redirected. So we could control where it redirects to, but we're in Postman and we haven't got anything set up. So it's just redirecting to some random site that we've put in, well, site we've entered in here. We can also specify a webhook to get called back. But essentially that'll give you back a success or a fail, or if the customer decided to pause somewhere through the dialogue, it can tell you what point they paused at. But essentially you'll get back success. And once you've got success, you can now know you can go in and access their bank accounts. And the first thing you're going to want to do is refresh the account, which essentially go out from the Open Banking API to the customer's bank accounts to pull the information in from the accounts that customer granted access to. So that's the refresh customer accounts. Which one is this one? This one is, I don't want to buy institution login ID. Let's go for the refresh customer account. There we are. So it's going to make a call using the customer ID that we've stored, and it's going to pull all the details in for those accounts. So nothing in the body, and there's nothing going to happen afterwards. So that should return back a quick snapshot of the accounts. And this can take a few seconds to execute because it's going in and pulling information. So it's just confirmed. You can see there the 3 accounts. There's the account ID, there's the credit card one we chose, there's the savings we chose, and the last one was a checking. So they're the 3 accounts we now have access to. And now all those accounts and the details have been cached on the Open Banking API and now available for us to call. So I'm just going to pull a quick transactions from one of those accounts. So let's pull them from where? Let's say the checking account. So let's grab that ID. It's a checking ID, and we're going to pull some transactions. So maybe get some space so I can see what all these actually say. So here is, we're going to pull the account transactions for a particular account. There's the account ID. So we don't have an account ID set up at the moment. So account ID. So let's go back to test drive and let's set one up. Account ID. Give it a value. So that's the account that we specifically want. I just grabbed it out of the return from the other one. You could do this through code, just like I did at the very start. So whatever account was pulled back. But for this case, I'm just copying and pasting. So let's go back here. And now if I hit send, there we are. It brings all 19 transactions it's found for this account and all of them back. So it tells you for each one, the merchant, the amount, all the way down through here. There's like 925, the debit, checking, to pulls all the ones down for this particular account, for this customer, for this account, for the last 6 months for this transaction. Now, one thing to watch for, which is going to be very useful, is these are obviously dummy ones that are being seeded into the account already, but you're obviously going to have your own use cases and you want to experiment with various different areas. So you want to be able to seed and put your own transactions into these sandbox accounts so that you can actually do things with that. And the way you do that, close some of these up, is you go down to the transaction push. And here you actually are able to create test transactions. So I'm going to spend a moment in here creating some test transactions. So you can specify the amount, give it a description, specify the date. You can specify whether it's pending. So if there's an account that, if there's a transaction that hasn't fully gone through yet, let's say for a credit card, you can specify that it's pending or that it's active, and the posted date. So the transaction dates, these are using epoch time. So let's choose one that's more appropriate for where we are. So there's tons of different sites out there. I'm just using this one to actually do an epoch time. So let's set one for actually now. So make sure this is refreshed. And human date. So let's take this for, let's just be clear. Let's make sure this was yesterday. And to the timestamp. So there's an epoch timestamp. So I'm going to go back here now to Postman, and I'm going to post a transaction, let's say for 14, yeah, just 1425. I'll keep that title a testing transaction description. I'm going to send this in for the account that we've already specified, still pulling the same variable and the same customer. And there it is there. Now, if I go back to the previous one, which is get all transactions, one thing to watch where it specifies the from date and the to date. So I want to make sure that I include my transactions. So I've actually hit send as is because that default value is probably set for some time earlier in the year. It's going to probably give me the same 19 transactions. And there we are, it does. But if I go back out here and let's make it today so we actually have, it's guaranteed to capture it. And we go back in here and I specify the to date and hit send. There. Well, 23 transactions. I put a few more test transactions in there since. So you'll see our test transactions come true. There's 1425, a testing transaction description. So that's how you can see the account with transactions, so that you can set these up if you want to specialize and show some utilities. You want to show that they've got limited balance, they've got sufficient balance. You can see these for as far back as you want. And with that, to be able to send test transactions, and then all the other APIs to be able to pull transactions and pull account details, you should have enough to get started on using our open banking APIs. So if you enjoyed this video and it was helpful, uh, please check the description for links to the other videos in the series that will go into deeper analysis of some of how to implement these, or which APIs here will be useful for particular use cases, as well as others that actually go deeper into using how to use these with Python and with Java. So thank you for your time.